On the Record this week.
Mr. Clerk, will you ring the bell for the first time in 2026?
The 2026 legislative session, it is underway in Georgia. They do have a packed to-do list, but there's one thing on a lot of their minds.
Affordability.
ICE operations drawing a lot of scrutiny from Democrats at the Georgia State Capitol.
No ICE! No ICE! No murders! No murders! No murders!
It's always a mess at I-75 and Hudson Bridge Road.
Governor Brian Kemp is pushing for more express lanes on I-75 in Henry County.
The field of candidates seeking former Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene's vacant congressional district seat is set. 22 candidates qualified for the race.
Georgia's Governor Brian Kemp, his final State of the State address takes place.
There's more work to be done over the next 37 legislative days. And for those of you who may think I'm a lame duck, just remember I have a big red pen.
Now, from Atlanta News First, the issues that matter to you. This is On the Record.
Georgia lawmakers back at the Capitol, set to tackle issues that impact you, your family, and your wallet. We are digging into the first full week of the 2026 legislative session during this special hour-long edition of On the Record. I'm Rick Fulbaum.
A lot to talk about today. I'm Doug Reardon. Thanks for joining us. State leaders say that they are laser focused on putting more money back in your pocket. In some cases, more of the money that you paid the government. Republican leaders in the Georgia Senate say they want to pass laws that would lower and eventually eliminate the state income tax. Senate leaders also signaled that they want to work with lawmakers over in the House to reduce property taxes across Georgia. But Democrats say they're concerned about all that lost revenue. The income tax alone accounts for about 44% of the state's general budget.
Governor Kemp laid out his marching orders for lawmakers during his 8th and final State of the State address. The nearly hour-long speech revolved mostly around economic policies, including ones from past years that allowed the governor and the legislature to build the state's rainy day fund to a record high and provide tax rebates for 3 consecutive years. But for this year's budget, Governor Kemp proposed a fourth $1 billion tax rebate to help bring financial relief to Georgia families struggling to make ends meet.
As Marty, the girls, and I travel all across our state, we hear from Georgians in all walks of life: groceries, rent, insurance, clothes for the kids. It all adds up to more than it used to. With this rebate, my administration and this General Assembly will have returned over $7.5 billion in surplus revenue to the taxpayers of our state over the last 4 years.
The governor also proposed a 20 basis point reduction in personal and corporate income tax rates and an enhanced retirement plan for Georgia law enforcement officers and a $2,000 bonus for state employees. That's double what it was last year.
And Democratic lawmakers we talked to about the governor's address say those proposed rebates, $250 for single filers, $500 on average for married couples, don't go far enough to address rising costs for families. They also want to hear more about what the governor has planned to address health care costs for Georgia families.
We have been talking about expanding Medicaid year after year, and we know that the ACA subsidies have expired. There are cuts to Medicaid coming down to us from the federal government. That's a real challenge, and I'm surprised that it was not mentioned.
And our panel joins us now in the studio. Chip Lake is a veteran GOP political strategist with Glendale Strategies, and Keisha Carter is a Democratic political fundraiser and principal of Public Service Partners. Thank you both for joining us and going on the record. Keisha, let me start with you. What did you think of the governor's speech and the priorities that he laid out?
Well, the one thing that I think is missing from his priorities is the affordability piece. We're not talking enough about what we should be doing to tackle the kitchen table issues. We've got a surplus in the government, but we are still having a deficit at the kitchen table. It doesn't really matter what he's talking about. $250 is not going to do much for anyone. We're talking about $20 a month when rent went up $1,800 a month last year, and most Georgians can't even afford to pay their health care costs. What are we doing to actually address those things? It seems like we're only focusing on corporates and those that can actually afford to get a break on the taxes and not doing enough to make Georgia affordable for all families that are already here. We've got a lot more work to do, and I was really more disappointed that he wasn't focusing on more legacy pieces in terms of really doing things to help rural Georgia, especially on our health care costs, especially after the failure of the Pathways program that he put forth.
Yeah, and listen, we know Democrats said money is great, but they did want those more long-term solutions. And Chip, from the Republican standpoint, what jumped out to you about this? Were you satisfied with some of what the governor was talking about?
Yeah, well, the first thing that jumped out to me when I was watching the governor's speech yesterday is how surreal it is that this was his 8th State of the State address and his final State of the State address. I mean, look, when he got elected governor of our state in 2018, our state was in really good shape, pretty good shape. And as a governor and as a leader, I mean, the one thing that you want to do when you leave office is to say, I left it better than I found it. And I saw a governor yesterday that feels very confident, and he's very happy in what he's accomplished. Our schools are funded, our state tax, the state tax rate has gone down for the last 4 years. He is returning $1 billion to the taxpayers this year. I believe our state is safer, and so I see a governor that kind of took a victory lap. He's accomplished most of what he wanted to accomplish as governor, and he's a governor that has won a lot more than he's lost. So I saw a little nostalgia in his delivery and presentation, and I know he still has another 11 months before he's gone, but he will not give another State of the State address to Georgians, so that's kind of my immediate takeaway after watching what he had to say yesterday.
Right. Like we said, and like he said, he still has that big red pen. He can line item veto, he can veto bills, so he's not done yet.
That's right.
And of course, at the State House, it's always a numbers game, right? And the numbers got much slimmer this year than they were last year, especially right when we talk about some of these resignations that we're seeing in the Senate and in the House for people running for office. Do Democrats have a better chance this year of putting up more of a fight on some of these things that in the past they really weren't able to push back on?
Yeah, it's going to be difficult. Those 2 resignations in the House right there, right before session began, I don't think those were expected. And so in dealing with that, being I think we were 11 seats from the majority, and now I think we're 13. We gained 1, we lost 2. So we've got a ways to go. I think we still have a job to do to fight for the people of Georgia every single day. But when it comes to winning the majority, that's going to be done in the summer and the fall is when that fight's going to have to happen, and just try to hold the line as much as we can and hope for a fast session is what we're looking for.
I'm hoping for the same.
Chip, as we have seen the last few election cycles, it's very hard to win the White House if you don't win Georgia. And what better way to win the state than by putting a popular former governor on the ticket? Has Brian Kemp positioned himself as a viable presidential contender in 2028? And do you think he wants it?
Well, that's a great question. At the end of the day, anybody that knows this governor knows he hates Washington, D.C. He doesn't like to travel up there every quarter when he had to as RGA chairman. And so, look, I don't have a crystal ball into what his thought process is. I don't think you're likely to see him run at the top of the ticket, but I don't think he's going to go away. We're never going to hear from him again. I think he's going to be very active politically in what happens in 2028. And, you know, to your point, I'm going to go out on a limb and say whoever wins Georgia in 2028, whichever party wins the White House here is likely going to have enough electoral votes to get sworn in as president. And I think the governor is going to be in a strong position to perhaps be a candidate for a cabinet position or maybe an ambassadorship. And so, look, being governor of Georgia is a very stressful job. He's done it now for 8 years. By all measures, it's been a big success. I think he's going to take a little bit of downtime to himself, spend a little bit of time with his family, and then determine what it is that he wants to do. But I'd be surprised if we see him running for president in 2 years.
I'm just thinking, let's get through the midterms.
Yeah, that's right. Okay? That's right.
First things first.
Yeah,
that's right.
Don't go anywhere. Still ahead on the record, Democratic lawmakers are now fighting to keep ICE out of Georgia. We'll tell you how.
A new push to help you get a bird's eye view at an invasive species threatening Georgia farms.
And a free-for-all in Northwest Georgia's special election. A lot of candidates, almost 24 of them, are fighting for that seat in Congress.
Right now, the race is on in Northwest Georgia. There is just over a month and a half until Election Day in Georgia's 14th Congressional District. 22 people are fighting to fill the seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, left empty by now former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. 3 Democrats, 1 independent, a libertarian, and 17 Republican candidates qualified for the race this past week, creating a very crowded field. And we're back with our panel. Chip, it's easier to talk about who's not running for Georgia 14 than it is to talk about who is. So many candidates. How does all this play out?
Look, if anybody could sit here today, Rick, and tell you how it's going to play out, you should ask them what the numbers are going to be next week for the Powerball drawing, because there are way too many candidates in this race. And there is a very compressed time frame in which these candidates have to get out and meet voters. And so it's absolute chaos. There will be some surprises. I don't know exactly what those surprises will be. I don't think any of these candidates are self-funders. They're running completely in the Atlanta and Chattanooga media market, so I don't think we're going to see candidates run television ads. So I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen. I am a constituent in that district, and I've already started getting mail from candidates, and so I'm looking forward to being a spectator to watch this race over the next 4 to 8 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, and then they have to do it all again a couple months later, too. So we could be talking like 5, 6 elections here. And Keisha, with all of this attention on the Republican side of the race, with all these candidates fighting for space, is that a good thing for Democrats?
Well, I mean, you know, for a Democrat to take that, or not to take it, but I would say to get into the runoff, you're talking about 25, 30% of the vote with so many people in there. So it's a high likelihood that we might make it into the runoff in that race. Trying to win that in the general in that district, I think would be very difficult to do, even in 2026 America, where we are. But I mean, I think you can at least be competitive. I know that Sean ran before, and he's got a turnout mechanism, as well as he's going to have quite a bit of money to be able to talk about what he's done before. So I expect that probably one of the Democrats will come into the runoff, but it's going to be a clown car of folks running this thing. So it's going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, it already is. And here's the thing. Marjorie Taylor Greene has said she will not be making an endorsement in the race to fill her own seat. But one candidate in the race is hoping that his time working alongside Congresswoman Greene will help put him over the edge. Jim Tully formerly served as GOP chairman for the 14th District and as head of Greene's district office. And he told me he launched his campaign to make sure whoever does represent the 14th in Congress next isn't doing it just for the promotion. You've worked with Congresswoman Greene in the past before. What was it like to kind of be behind the scenes of that operation?
It was absolutely amazing to have the most recognizable female member of Congress ask you to come join the team. Was quite the opportunity.
You're in this position now where you could be her predecessor. And so having worked with her in the past, what did you glean from her style and from her way of running things?
Marjorie's responsiveness to the voter, to the children, the blue-collar workers, to business owners, all of them was incredible, the way that she could react and talk to them how they needed to be talked to, listen to them, to the things that they said, and then take that to Washington and be responsive individually. That was the best part, to be responsible individually to her constituents, and it was an amazing thing.
Do you want to be that firebrand style politician?
Well, there's many different ways to fight, and to be a firebrand, I think, has run its course. I think that we have to revert back to foundational representation. I believe we have gotten so far away from that we don't even know who we are. We don't talk about families and children like we should. The collective of community. It takes a village. Those things are so important, and we have got away from that foundational aspect of who we are as Georgians and Americans, that we just want to go slash and put pop knots on people's heads. I mean, this fighting firebrand style governance, it has got to stop.
And so these kitchen table issues, certainly that rotate around the affordability of life in general, I think are what is on people's minds more than maybe anything else. How do we do that? How do we make housing cheaper? How do we make people's money go farther? How do we make everything a little easier for the people of the 14th?
It goes back to that involvement of each and every one of us. So we're watching home prices go through the roof. And that's not a federal issue. That's a local issue. That's in your city, that's in your county, and we're watching property tax go through the roof. We're watching home building, rental subdivisions going up left and right. They are not allowing people to realize the dream of home ownership. So this is created by us not being involved. We've allowed city governments and county governments to run rampant and run our taxes up, creating this affordability and housing crisis that makes houses too expensive. Things that I can do as the congressman is to help alleviate unnecessary regulations, environmental protection regulations that cause it to be difficult to deliver energy to America. Has the capabilities. We should get out of the way. Government should get out of the way and let top-notch American companies do what they do best, and that's provide goods and services to the American people.
The PSC election. We saw there was a Democrat elected in a very red, traditionally red Athens district to the state house. Do you think that could happen in a district like the 14th come the midterms?
Now, people say Georgia's red, and especially the 14th district is red, but they're coming for it. And I am concerned that Republicans won't turn out in this special, and they won't turn out in the midterms.
Marjorie Taylor Greene spent 5 years representing Georgia's 14th district, but one candidate in that race to replace her thinks the Congresswoman generated a lot of headlines, but not a lot of change. I spoke to Republican candidate Star Black about her campaign on the record. Certainly, Marjorie Taylor Greene was very popular in the 14th district. You know, she was reelected oftentimes by double-digit margins, and so big shoes to fill for whoever I think steps into them.
You know, Marjorie's a great fighter, but she's not a great listener, and she didn't listen to the district. She was great about grabbing a headline, but there was no action behind it. And I've lived in the district for 17 years, and she was my representative, and I saw nothing happening other than a headline. And I wanted to hold her accountable for that. She never had a plan. She would call things out, which is great. She has a phenomenal way of calling things out, but there was no action behind it. So I, being a federal servant for 28 years, I'm the only candidate in this race that has federal experience, and I know how to work with other federal agencies to get the money we need.
What were some of the things you wish that she had done more of for the district?
Bringing in small businesses, building up our trade schools, because, let's face it, AI is not going to fix your plumbing.
If you're elected in your service as the representative of the 14th district, what does the district need right now?
We need to build up our small businesses. We need to get government out of the way of small businesses. We need to get the red tape out. We need to put statesmanship back into this office. And we need people that aren't just fighters like Marjorie was, but we also need people that are listeners, that are the voice of the people.
I think that the 14th faces a lot of the same issues that we see in many, many districts around North Georgia and the state generally, where you have cost of living is a concern for people. Mm-hmm. How do you tackle those kind of day-to-day things? Like, what are your plans for people who are facing this affordability issue?
Competition is what fuels lower prices to get things happening. So I think if we cut the red tape, we let entrepreneurs do what they do best, let companies do what they do best, then competition will automatically, just by its pure nature, drive down prices.
I wanted to ask you about one specific piece of your platform that I thought was really unique. Correct me on the verbiage exactly, but more of a caregivers database.
The Caregivers Network is what I call it. I was a caregiver for my husband and my mother while I was working disasters. When I started looking at, why can't I find these resources? And I thought, why don't we do that for caregivers? Why don't, because this church over here provides this service, this food pantry provides this service. Why can't we consolidate that? I'm not looking to create a new department, but maybe even fold it up under, Health and Human Services, to where it's one agency that lists everything, even private, nonprofit, foundations, for-profit, in one place.
And you can watch both of my full interviews with Star Black and Jim Tully right now on the Atlanta News First app. Scan the code on your screen to download it and get up-to-the-minute notifications from the campaign trail sent straight to your phone.
Straight ahead on the record, everyone complains about the traffic in North Georgia, but no one does anything about it. Well, Governor Kemp wants you to know that he's doing something about it, a multi-billion-dollar plan to ease the gridlock. Next.
Plus, a bipartisan push at the Georgia Capitol to pump the brakes on Georgia's data center boom.
Happening now, Georgia lawmakers are debating bills that could pause the growth of data centers across our state. A report from the University of Georgia found that our state has about 63 active data centers, the majority located in the metro, in metro Atlanta, and there are proposals in the works for about 200 more. Opponents of the facilities cite environmental and health concerns, along with the relatively low number of permanent jobs they create. One Democratic state representative says that pace of new data facilities under construction is a problem. She's proposing a bill that would put a pause on that through 2027. Opponents of the bill say a statewide moratorium goes too far and could choke off economic growth. Over in the state Senate, a bill just introduced could repeal the tax credit for new data centers. Republican sponsors of the bill say Georgia missed out on more than $600 million worth of revenue last year because of that tax credit. Data centers are expected to be a big sticking point for lawmakers this year, with hundreds of projects proposed and communities across the state demanding answers. We will, of course, follow it all and present all sides of the story on the record.
Well, coming up next, a plan to change what you can buy with SNAP benefits, the restrictions that could affect your future grocery lists.
Now, from Atlanta News First, the issues that matter to you. This is On the Record.
Welcome back. The first week of Georgia's 2026 legislative session is now in the books. And on the record, I'm Doug Reardon.
And I'm Rick Folbaum. And several newly sworn-in lawmakers are now representing you under the Gold Dome. 5 new legislators, including 3 representatives in the state House, and 2 state senators are now getting to work at the Capitol after special elections to fill seats left vacant last year. We caught up with some of them on their first day.
I wrote every senator from both parties a handwritten note just telling them that, telling everybody looking forward to seeing them down here.
I got a phone call from Vice President Kamala Harris who told me that I had given hope to the nation, and that felt a little heavy to hear.
Yeah, we expect to see at least 1 more member sworn in before the end of the legislative session. Voters in Middle Georgia will actually vote on a new state senator Tuesday. 4 Republicans and 1 Democrat are working to win over voters in a special election there for District 18. That seat was left vacant by Senator John F. Kennedy. He resigned from the legislature last month to focus on his run for lieutenant governor. Again, that special election to fill his seat is Tuesday. And another special election could be coming soon after a departure you might have missed from the state Senate. Colton Moore, his seat representing Georgia's 53rd district, is now empty. Trenton Republican tendered his resignation on the same day that he officially qualified for a congressional run. Moore is one of almost 24 of those candidates we mentioned earlier hoping to represent Georgia's 14th congressional district in the U.S. House of Representatives. By the way, Rick, you spoke to him about that campaign just last week, and you can stream that interview right now on ANF+.
Well, the statewide race for lieutenant governor is getting more crowded. Another Democrat just threw his hat in the ring. Seth Clark, who recently resigned from the Macon-Bibb County Commission, has announced his candidacy. He joins fellow Democrats, State Senator Josh McLaurin and attorney Richard Wright, who had already announced their campaigns. The 3 will face off in the May 19th primary to succeed Republican Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, who is running for governor.
Well, right now, new polling shows many Americans disagree with how Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, is operating in the U.S.
51% of respondents to a CNN poll say that ICE is making cities less safe. That data coming on the heels of the recent fatal shooting of Renee Good, the 37-year-old mother who was killed by an ICE agent in Minneapolis. ICE operations like the one in Minnesota are drawing scrutiny from Democrats at the Georgia Capitol.
And Democratic leaders in the Senate actually rolled out a package of bills aimed at limiting how the agency operates in our state. The proposed legislation would require ICE agents to identify themselves visibly and limit enforcement actions in sensitive locations. That includes schools, churches, hospitals. Mildred Pierre, whose husband Rodney Taylor is currently being held at a detention center, supports that legislation, but Republican leaders criticized the proposals. Listen.
The gentlemen did not have any markings on their bulletproof vests. It was scary because they all had their guns, and my kids were in the car.
My bill will call for ICE agents to take off their mask, to show their face. We have men who show up in tactical equipment, but nothing that identifies them as federal agents.
As far as wearing of tactical gear, whether it be a mask, a helmet, or anything else, that is a decision made based case by case, and the supervisors make those determinations. Not a group of legislators sitting in an air-conditioned and heated room in the middle of Atlanta, Georgia.
Let's reintroduce our panel. Chip Lake is a veteran GOP political strategist with Glendale Strategies, And Keisha Carter is a Democratic political fundraiser, principal of Public Service Partners. Thank you again for joining us and going on the record. And Chip, of course, voters elected Donald Trump in part because of his promise to crack down on illegal immigration. But is this what they signed up for?
You know, Rick, for decades, one of the biggest criticisms that I hear from voters, and it's not criticisms limited to Republicans or Democrats, but is that people run for office and they say one thing and then they get into office and they do something else. If you go back and look at any of the footage from any of Donald Trump's rallies and any of his campaign rhetoric last cycle, he was very clear that he was going to step up enforcement on the immigration issue. So I think, yes, he's doing exactly what he said he was going to do on the campaign trail.
And Keisha, we have a number of detention facilities here in Georgia. They're considering adding more. In fact, we just learned that in the last couple of weeks. Do you see this being, again, one of the biggest political issues going into not just the 26 midterms, but maybe an extending to the 28 presidential campaign?
Absolutely. I don't think this is about immigration anymore. This is about public safety. We have masked law enforcement or federal law enforcement figures going after people, citizens in the streets, not identifying themselves. And that shouldn't be stood for here in Georgia or anywhere. I think we're well past border policy or immigration. And now we're having people do things that are actually hurting our citizens, threatening insurrection acts and everything else that goes with it. We are no longer talking about immigration anymore. We've had loss of life from people that are not law enforcement, being law enforcement officers and wanting to be respected the same way, but are not doing the things that we know that our law enforcement, the good and professional ones, will do.
And kind of the same question, Chip, but this is obviously Republicans have a very different view of how this is all playing out. And so how do they delicately handle this going into the 2026 midterms, you know, when we see things like what's happening in Minneapolis?
Yeah, I think you're going to see Republicans run towards the border security issue and not away from it. You know, the reality is I believe that this issue is more of a base issue for both parties, that it's not an issue that really drives the middle. I think the 2026 election is probably likely going to be more of a kitchen tables issue and an affordability. Those are going to be the issues that people are talking about. To the extent that there are people in the middle that might have a concern right now with some of the activities that ICE is conducting, they're also the same people that did not like the chaos at the border and the open borders policies that I would argue we had under the previous administration. So I think Democrats know, I don't have a crystal ball to know who the Democratic nominee for governor is going to be. We know John Ossoff is running for re-election, and I think they have to be a little careful in how they answer this question too, because if this is not the solution, I don't think they're going to advocate going back to the immigration policies that we had under the previous administration.
Well, let's ask our Democrat here on the panel, Keisha.
I'm sure she could tell us.
So if
I don't know if I have that ball either.
So if somebody's going to win statewide office from the U.S. Senate race, for Senator Ossoff, who's running for re-election, in the governor's race, lieutenant governor's race, they're going to have to tack to the middle a little bit on some of these issues. Is this issue, illegal immigration, something that they can use to maybe show moderates and independents out there that they are not too far to the left?
I don't think this issue is about immigration anymore. I think we have to remember that. The issues that are happening right now are not happening at the border. They're happening in American streets with ICE officers. If we're talking about the crisis at the border, then this should have happened at the border. This didn't. This happened on an average American middle-class street. This is not what the American public signed up for. And I think any legislator can stand on that and say, this is not what we signed up for. We can talk about border policy. We can talk about enforced immigration. What we're not going to do is allow for American people to be shot and killed in the middle of our streets.
Keisha, Chip, thank you guys for lending a little extra time, a little extra thought to this special edition. We appreciate you guys being here. And still ahead, Metro Atlanta drivers could soon see some real relief from gridlock. And so, as Governor Kemp makes $1 billion proposal to improve some of Georgia's most congested highways.
Also, the Trump administration wants Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to hand over sensitive voter information. And now, Georgia lawmakers are piling on in a push for transparency.
On the record right now, the race for governor is now coming back into focus after some high-profile endorsements for some of the Georgia candidates, including for Democrat Jason Estevez. The former U.S. Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates just endorsed her support of Estevez's gubernatorial campaign. Yates, an Atlanta native, made headlines back in 2017. President Donald Trump fired her for refusing to enforce his Muslim travel ban. Estevez is a former state senator and one of 7 candidates fighting to secure the Democratic nomination in that race to succeed Governor Brian Kemp.
The public advocacy group created by the late conservative activist Charlie Kirk just made its endorsement in the governor's race. Turning Point Action is endorsing Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones in Georgia's Republican primary. Jones is one of 5 Republicans fighting to take over the governor's mansion next year. And right now, the lieutenant governor is pushing for accountability from one of his GOP primary opponents.
Jones is calling for Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to testify before the Georgia Senate's Ethics Committee. Jones wants Raffensperger to answer for what he called repeated failures in protecting the integrity of Georgia's elections. The lieutenant governor cited news from last month confirming Fulton County leaders wrongly certified 315,000 ballots that were not properly signed by poll workers during the 2020 presidential election.
Lawmakers in the Georgia Senate are also urging Raffensperger to comply with requests by the Department of Justice to hand over Georgia's complete voter roll, which includes sensitive information like your social security number and date of birth. The DOJ sued the Secretary of State's office just last month in an effort to secure that information. Raffensperger's office maintains that state law prevents sensitive voter information from being shared with outside parties.
And in the meantime, President Trump's effort to recoup millions of dollars in legal fees related to his now defunct election interference indictment is kind of up in the air right now. The head of Georgia's prosecuting attorney's council says the new state law used by the president and others who are charged in that case to seek attorney fees has, quote, serious and potentially unconstitutional deficiencies. Keep in mind, this is the same guy that threw that case out. The law passed just last year and lets defendants request fees if a prosecutor is disqualified for improper conduct, which is the case here. Last fall, Fulton County DA Fonnie Willis was disqualified from prosecuting the president and his allies on criminal charges, alleging that they tried to overturn the results of the 2020 election here in our state. That case was then officially tossed out in November. President Trump sued Fulton County for more than $6 million for legal fees related to that election meddling case. Right now, it's unclear if that money will be paid out.
On the record right now, we are just a few months away from primary elections across Georgia, but as we wait to find out which candidates will represent each party in November's general elections, new polling shows that more Americans are rejecting the 2 major political parties. Just under half of U.S. adults now identify as independents. That's according to a new Gallup poll. It's a substantial shift from 20 years ago when closer to 1/3 of Americans said that they did not identify with the Democrats or Republicans. Younger Americans driving change, with majorities of Gen Z and millennial adults now identifying as independents. 56% of Gen Z adults call themselves independents, and about half of independents call themselves moderates. According to Gallup's analysis, the shift to the middle appears increasingly to be driven by their unhappiness with the party in power. Political science professor and Atlanta News First political analyst Dr. Ben Taylor joins us on the record. Good to see you. Thanks very much for being here. You spend time with students every day.
I do, yes.
Do these numbers surprise you?
They don't surprise me at all. And what we're seeing really is sort of a long-term trend in partisan identification. Some of it is driven by sociology, so it's like how people are socialized into politics. Some of it is sort of what we might think of as a generational effect. Younger voters are just becoming aware of politics and just observing the political world and sort of figuring out where they sit in politics. But what I would draw your attention to is that while the top line number for independents is growing, if you ask, the next question Gallup asks, and it's in that data, is, well, do you lean closer to the Republican or Democratic Party? And indeed, only about 10% of Americans say, no, I'm a true independent. And that's pretty stable over the last few decades. And what you see actually in more recent data is that Democrats have grown a little bit compared to where they were a few years ago, which is a response to Republicans being in power in Washington. So it's something of a thermostatic reaction. Republicans are in power, people tend to be a little more Democratic. Democrats are in power, people tend to be a little more Republican, and we see that over the decades in public opinion.
What do you think it is more, the candidates from each party or the issues that they espouse?
Well, that's a great question, and it really is about today in the 21st century. It's about all of our elections are candidate-centered. So whereas in decades past, presidential campaigns have long been candidate-centered. People loved President Bush, and so they identified with the Republican Party, or President Obama similarly. And you see a lot of that with President Trump today and what have you. But now all of our elections are really candidate-focused, and so people aren't nearly as attached to the party label as they once were. But when push comes to shove and they go vote, they tend to vote straight tickets. So if you think of yourself as a Democrat, you're largely voting for Democrats. If you think of yourself as a Republican, you're largely voting for Republicans, and that really becomes crystallized around the 25 to 30 years old. It's a combination of things. That's really when things begin to harden.
I feel like I've heard people complain about our two-party system for a long time, and yet it's still here. We haven't been able to get rid of it.
That's right.
What do you think? What kind of situation or circumstances would have to arise where a third-party candidate could make a viable run for the presidency?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, we've seen it at times, right? Ross Perot in 1992 won 19% of the popular vote. People forget that. He won 19% of all the votes in that presidential election, and he won 0 electoral college votes. And so that's what's important about running a third-party candidacy. Third-party candidates aren't really going to win. Like the structure, the way we do our elections with single-member districts with first past the post doesn't allow that third-party candidate to have an opportunity to win, but it does create opportunities for them to change election outcomes. You could think of all kinds of examples in Georgia's own Senate elections where libertarians, potentially, who might be more conservative-leaning, but result in runoff elections where Democrats win. And so that changes an election outcome, even though the libertarian didn't win. And so that's sort of the conundrum of our electoral system. So what would it take for a third-party candidate to win? Well, it would take them to probably figure out a way to get the allegiance of one of the two major parties, which, again, you can imagine that happening, but it's difficult to actually see it happen.
Great insight, as always. Dr. Ben Taylor, thank you. Doug.
Ahead, next on The Record, Georgia lawmakers honor a civil rights icon at the Capitol. Well, on the record right now, Georgia lawmakers are considering new hunting methods.
Right, legislation could soon allow you to track down feral hogs using drones. According to the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, feral hogs can cause extensive damage to crops, livestock, and the environment as a whole. Right now, the invasive species is kept at bay through exclusion and the use of fencing, hunting with dogs, and trapping. But House Bill 946 would allow the use of unmanned aircraft systems or drones to locate feral hogs. Research from the University of Georgia found the wild pigs can cost farmers in rural Georgia more than $100,000 in damage.
And Georgia lawmakers may soon restrict what you're allowed to buy at the grocery store using SNAP benefits. Republican sponsors of the SNAP Healthier Choices Act say that the legislation doubles down on a federal push to support low-income families' nutritional needs. If passed, more than 1.4 million Georgians who use SNAP benefits could see more restrictions placed on their grocery lists. That would include limits on the amount of carbonated soft drinks, including diet sodas. It would ban you from purchasing candy, chocolate, and sugar-based confections with your SNAP benefits, and energy drinks would also no longer be SNAP eligible. 5 other states have enacted similar restrictions on SNAP benefits, including Indiana, Iowa, Nebraska, Utah, and West Virginia.
Right now, Governor Brian Kemp is making a multi-billion-dollar push to unclog some of Metro Atlanta's most congested interstate highways.
We probably should have started with this, but he wants to add more express lanes on I-75 in Henry County and make improvements to Georgia 316, which connects Metro Atlanta to Athens. Atlanta News First reporter Adam Murphy spoke to Georgians who say they endure daily headaches on those busy roads.
Oh, it's every day.
Just about every day. It's going to take you an hour to get maybe 1 or 2 exits.
This is one of Metro Atlanta's worst traffic jams. Drivers tap the brakes daily on Interstate 75 South in Henry County.
We have to drive to the north end of Atlanta for baseball tournaments or sporting events or whatever, and it's going to take you an hour to get through traffic.
Then I'll try to take a back road to avoid all that mess, but it's gotten where the back roads are just about as bad as that. Now there's a proposed plan to improve traffic flow across the metro. Governor Kemp shared that with community leaders on Wednesday. He said a study shows commuters in and out of Atlanta lost at least 75 hours to traffic at a cost of over $1,400 a person.
By their calculations, hours lost to traffic in Metro Atlanta increased by 23% just in the last 2 years alone, the third highest increase in the country.
The governor proposed an investment of $1.8 billion to increase roadway capacity on 75 South in Henry County by adding dedicated express lanes in both directions. He also proposed $200 million to continue roadway improvements on Georgia Highway 316 between Atlanta and Athens.
For right now, I mean, you can add as many lanes as you want, but eventually you're going to run out of real estate.
If you put more lanes in, I think you have more accidents. Seriously, because of the way people drive around here.
Adam Murphy, Atlanta News First.
Right, we will take what we can get, I think, is most people's mentality. Well, this week we are pausing to remember an Atlanta native and a civil rights icon.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s fight for justice and equality now being highlighted across the nation and at the Georgia State Capitol. Governor Brian Kemp was on hand as State Representative Billy Mitchell led lawmakers in a solemn ceremony under the Gold Dome, as they reflected on Dr. King's lifelong dedication to service, what it means to them.
All right, and that is our show. Thank you to our guests, Keisha Carter and Chip Lake, as well as Dr. Ben Taylor.
And thank you for watching. We'll see you next Sunday.